I'm Richard Heller, a pediatric radiologist in Chicago, Illinois, and I am honored to be the host of RSNA Fast 5. Fast 5 was created to be a venue to highlight subjects that maybe didn't fit perfectly into other RSNA sessions, but were nonetheless deemed valuable. They're intended to be brief, high-level presentations given TED Talk style on the big stage at the Ari Crown Theater at McCormick Place in Chicago. Obviously, and unfortunately, that won't be happening this year. But this year's presenters have stepped up to the challenge of presenting in a virtual age. We're fortunate to have 5 outstanding presenters whose talks reflect the international flavor of RSNA. I hope you appreciate the theme of the session. As always, the session is rooted in the theme of RSNA, which this year is Human Insight, Visionary Medicine. With that said, it would be tone deaf to not acknowledge the meeting is taking place during a global pandemic. Our first 2 speakers address the nature of our global society and the importance of culture. Our final 3 speakers reflect on the changes they've experienced during the pandemic, with differing perspectives from attending to trainee and from 3 different nations. Our first speaker is Dr. George Vilanilam. He's a radiology resident at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences in Little Rock, Arkansas. He'll be speaking to us about international medical graduates in radiology, challenges and opportunities.
Thank you, Dr. Heller. It's an absolute pleasure to be talking here today. About 5 years ago, there was a young woman in her early 20s who woke up to the incessant beeping of a ventilator. Her throat felt uncomfortable. There was a tube going through. Her eyes bleary to the labyrinth of ventilator tubing. She was intubated. Just months before her then current predicament, she was given a diagnosis of tuberculosis. However, her family and society had shunned her to live in a dark room without any medication. They said, "This is a disease of time. Give it reverence and it will fade on its own." In a society where inequality was at an extreme high and literacy at a record low, she stayed there, or she lay there in the prison of her body, a silent unrest against fate as she succumbed to a curable disease, leaving behind a toddler and a husband. Experiences like these are unfortunately not uncommon in the training of an international medical graduate. My talk aims to outline some of these challenges and opportunities for the international medical graduate in radiology. 1 in 4 physicians in the United States has completed medical school outside the US or Canada, or in other words, is an international medical graduate or an IMG. 11% of radiology trainees and 12% of practicing radiologists are IMGs. And international schools vary in terms of quality, population cohorts served, and durations ranging from about 2 to 7 years. In fact, after one graduates from medical school, various organizations are involved in the subsequent credentialing process. The USMLE, the National Board of Medical Examiners, of course, the ERA's residency application system, the National Residency Matching Program, all of who are stakeholders in this residency and fellowship training process. Speaking of heterogeneity in this medical school education, this heterogeneity is dealt with and handled by the primary body called the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates, or ECFMG. Once an applicant successfully completes step 1, 2CK, and 2CS within the stipulated guidelines, their credentials are then verified and only then issued an ECFMG certificate, without which the applicant is unable to participate in the residency match. Speaking of eligibility, visa sponsorship becomes a very relevant issue. And the most commonly used visa is a J1 alien physician visa. This is sponsored by ECFMG for a maximum period of 7 years. H1B is a specialty worker visa. It is not limited to medical professionals. And this is directly sponsored by the institution. Some programs, of course, accept a 1 year of F1 OPT, the optional practical training for just the first year. Of course, we have a whole group of other residents who are international graduates who are either US citizens or green card holders. Visa restrictions are in dynamic flux each year. However, 161 IMGs matched into radiology residency programs just in the last year. And over the past 15 years, about more than 1,000 non-US citizens have been recruited. And this year, with the global pandemic, there have been delays in the USMLE exams, suspension of the Step 2 CS exam until mid-2021. There was a new English test introduced as a substitute for the Step 2 CS to test for English language proficiency, all in turn leading to a delay in certification and additional gap year since graduation. It's interesting to note that the NRMP data shows that the average matched IMG was 6.2 years out of graduation, owing to home country residencies or fellowships or other graduate degrees. However, when IMGs are incorporated into the US healthcare system, they play an exceptional role in meeting the workforce demands of the American population, particularly the J-1 waiver visa program. That facilitates IMGs to provide radiology services to designated, underserved rural areas and the Veterans Affairs hospitals. While mentorship and sponsorship of IMGs is important to enable diversity and innovation within organizations, more importantly is knowing the problems and being prepared to handle the unique challenges IMGs face to promote intentional inclusion as well as retention of IMGs. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vilanilam. Our next speaker is Dr. Michael Fishman. Dr. Fishman is a breast imaging radiologist from Boston Medical Center in Boston, Massachusetts. And he'll be speaking to us about radiology workplace culture.
Thank you, Rich. Take a moment and think about a job you considered the best. Why? Did you feel respected, valued, or engaged? Now consider a job you considered the worst. What was different? How did the culture of the workplace contribute to your experience? When I think of a culture, here's what I mean: the unwritten rules guiding attitudes and behaviors at work. There is a dark side of culture, the toxic workplace, which I've experienced firsthand. As a fellow, I encountered a culture of fear, driven by public criticism and political allegiances. Trust and respect were undermined and replaced by pervasive targeted blame and ridicule. The culture impacted everyone in our section, especially those with the lowest status. Every day was stressful. What is the impact of a toxic culture? Victims enter stress response with feelings of fear, hopelessness, humiliation, and anxiety. This impacts their reasoning, impulse management, focus, and problem solving. Productivity declines, job turnover rises, quality and safety suffers, and burnout prevails. In 2019, Aunt Minnie declared burnout the biggest threat to radiology, an invisible epidemic impacting nearly half of radiologists. Unfortunately, in 2020, an invisible pandemic arrived, bringing fear, anxiety, sickness, and death. We started wearing a new type of mask and quarantined for protection. The cauldron of social injustice boiled over with international awareness and growing solidarity to support those historically subjugated and increase equity and representation. Finally, a contentious political climate promoted false and inaccurate information to justify policy based on self-interest, not science or the common good. How has COVID impacted workplace culture and the rise of burnout? The world of radiology was turned upside down. Workloads fluctuated with less control over volume. An exodus from the reading rooms to remote isolated workspaces and Zoom meetings resulted in a loss of social cohesion and community. These changes and others may have elevated your stress response, including loss of focus, increased exhaustion, cynicism, and uncertainty, all contributing to burnout. According to McKinsey and Lean-In Foundation's recent survey, employees are struggling to do their jobs as work-home boundaries are blurred. Women in particular, especially women of color, are negatively impacted. 1 in 3 mothers considered leaving the workplace due to childcare. This could be catastrophic to gender equity, especially in radiology, as women already represent less than a quarter of the radiologist workforce. Have you all heard of the phrase WFH? Work from home. What if instead your workplace culture promoted a new meaning? Wellness. Take care of your own well-being. Practice gratitude. promotes sleep, exercise, mindfulness, and fun, understanding that much is beyond our control. Flexibility. We are resilient and adaptable. Let's envision how the work is done. And helpfulness. Embrace a service-oriented mindset, teamwork, and empowerment and personal control to rectify the learned helplessness so prevalent in toxic cultures. This WFH leads to shared purpose and organizational thriving, respectful behavior triggering emotions of happiness, trust, inclusion, and safety, driving productivity, engagement, well-being, and resilience. Reimagine a workplace culture that positively impacts our lives. What is at its core? Values. Can we reframe COVID as a call to action of our core values? Civility, a culture that's built on respect, psychological safety, and kindness. Practice coaching skills of active listening and empathy. Optimism, use positive psychology, including growth mindset, to think about the future and set goals to help us thrive in the present. Vulnerability is the courage to say the hard things first, the openness, candor, and transparency to ask for feedback regularly and use it. Sacrifice the ego. You don't have to know everything. Inclusion and diversity. Solicit feedback to hear different perspectives and experiences. Assess and remove bias and privilege. Create strategy to promote equity, which may include personal sacrifices. And design thinking. Channel your curiosity and creativity. Tolerate failure to drive innovation, growth, and success. 8 years ago, I never imagined sharing my story as a cautionary tale of toxic workplaces. My wish for us radiology professionals is that we support each other to reach our best selves and reestablish respectful, positive workplace culture in radiology. Wellness will thrive, burnout will plummet, respectful behavior drives positive emotions, driving productivity and well-being. An upward spiral. May we remove our masks and share our facial expressions, extending our arms to reconnect and build a better tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fishman. Our next speaker is Dr. Jennifer Weaver. Dr. Weaver is an associate professor from the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She'll be speaking to us about pandemic-induced isolation and its effect on radiology education. Dr. Weaver.
Thank you, Dr. Heller. I enjoy teaching. It is one of the most rewarding parts of my career. Prior to the pandemic, our musculoskeletal reading room was a vibrant hub. We had learners of all levels, medical students, residents, fellows, and attendings, all learning from each other. While our focus was always on patient care first, we had fun. We listened to music while we shared cases and educational pearls. We were social. We were a community. Then COVID entered our lives. The pandemic dramatically and instantaneously changed our way of educating. Physical distancing requirements altered our traditional teaching venues. Our once energetic musculoskeletal reading room was reduced to a single lonely PAX. We could no longer have side-by-side readouts with our learners, nor could we have didactic lectures together in the same conference room. We resorted to giving trainees feedback on their imaging interpretation via telephone or instant messaging. Faculty-led noon conferences were replaced with self-study. We were alone. As the months passed, we realized that this pandemic would be a marathon, not a sprint. Learners were still seeing cases and had been provided with an abundance of additional learning resources. They should be okay, right? Well, we asked our residents how they were feeling. They overwhelmingly reported feeling isolated. Quite honestly, many faculty felt the same. One resident shared with us that they felt learning and teaching have been on pause during this time. Another said, radiology is already a very isolated discipline. I find the complete isolation a bit much. Another pointed out that if we could just learn by looking at pictures and reading other people's words, we probably wouldn't need a residency program. This feedback gave us valuable insight into key elements of radiology education, the importance of human interaction and a sense of community. The old stereotype of a radiologist sitting happily alone in a dark room is not only false, but is in direct opposition to reality. Isolation was clearly affecting both our resident and faculty experience. With our realization of the importance of social interaction, we intervened. We needed to restore our sense of community. We used creative problem solving to devise actionable ways to increase our human-to-human interaction. Most importantly, we implemented an interactive video conferencing platform to provide virtual readouts that are nearly identical to previous in-person readouts. Prior to implementing video conferencing readouts, 75% of residents reported feeling isolated during their residency education. After implementation, this percentage decreased by 2/3, a dramatic change, but we still have some room to improve. We also utilize web cameras to increase resident and faculty engagement through nonverbal cues. Prior to their use, less than half of our residents thought that the cameras would be helpful. However, after using them for several months, the large majority feel that the cameras help to decrease feelings of isolation. Many faculty also consciously try to spend time talking with the residents about non-radiology topics during readout to try to recreate that feel of being in a radiology reading room together. Residents have unanimously reported that this small talk helps them to feel less isolated, again, confirming the importance of human interaction during the learning process. The pandemic has fundamentally changed our world. Virtual learning is now and will continue to be an essential part of our daily life. As faculty, we must remember what we truly care about, our role in caring for patients and educating the next generation of physicians. Technology can help break down barriers and provide valuable educational opportunities. It is not a replacement for human interaction, but rather a facilitator of human interaction. The biggest lesson that the pandemic has taught us is that even when we are physically distanced, we must find ways to be socially, emotionally, and educationally together. In other words, we must remain a community.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Aisling Fagan. Dr. Fagan is a radiology resident from Imperial College NHS Trust in London, UK, and she'll be speaking to us about bringing face-to-face radiology teaching online. Dr. Fagan.
So my name is Aisling, and I'm a radiology resident in London, United Kingdom. Building on from what you've just heard from Dr. Weaver, I'll be sharing our experience of bringing face-to-face radiology education online, and I feel that this title is particularly relevant today. 12 months ago, I was beginning the preparation for my final radiology exam. Here on the left, you'll see a photo of my colleagues and I. We learned radiology by crowding around a packed workstation. You can just about make me out in the far left. This meant that unless someone pinged or instant messaged you the patient information, you could only glean the detail visible from a distance of about 1 meter or so. Plus, if we were on night shifts, if we were caring for loved ones, or if we were away on holiday, that meant that we would miss the teaching session entirely. Our trainees work across 3 different hospital sites, which meant that I would often be biking across between sites just within the same working day. While this kept me fit, it was a massive waste of time. We traveled up and down the country to attend exam preparation workshops and conferences. And of course, once a year, we flew across the Atlantic to attend our favorite international radiology conference. The problem was only 13% of our residents felt that this system of teaching was good or excellent. They must have been the ones right at the front. Then COVID hit. Suddenly, we were told to only attend work if we really were needed in order to maintain social distancing. This meant no more congregating around workstations. Our workload decreased massively, and with it, our opportunities for on-the-job learning. Some of us were pulled to intensive care in order to provide emergency COVID care. Others had exams cancelled. I know this was the same in the US. We had to make some really big changes. Our teaching is now done remotely by sharing screens using our in-house packs. We can view teaching sessions from our own screens while maintaining social distancing. This also gives us a close-up view of any of the relevant findings. It's recorded, so we can also catch up on the teaching that we miss while we're working other shifts, even from bed if that's what you want to do. And the maximum commute is about a 2-minute walk just to find a quiet room. The teaching is significantly more accessible for all of us because it's recorded, so people can go through it at their own pace. Importantly, it's just as interactive as previously with the control screen function. Plus, any staff that are sick, isolating, or shielding can continue to learn from a distance. Are there some downsides? Yes, of course. Connectivity and IT issues are a problem as always. Even more important is the loss of nonverbal communication, although I like Dr. Weaver's suggestion. Now, 94% of our trainees rate our teaching as good or excellent, and this is a huge change from 13% previously. Would we have seen this dramatic improvement without the pandemic? Maybe, eventually, but certainly not this quickly. Rahm Emanuel is a former mayor of Chicago, and I think he had the right idea when he said, never allow a good crisis go to waste. COVID-19 has forced us to change our ways. We're not just surviving, we're thriving, at least in some aspects. When this is over, whenever that may be, I hope that we remember the lessons that we've learned. I hope that we don't go back to crowding around workstations, trying to catch a glimpse of the key finding that cinches the diagnosis. Sometimes I do really miss the crowds though, and I can't wait to be back in Chicago in 2021, crowding around a deep dish pizza with my colleagues and friends. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our final speaker is Dr. Dyan Flores. Dr. Flores is a musculoskeletal imaging fellow from St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver. She will be speaking to us about radiology education today with an eye to the future. Dr. Flores.
Thank you, Dr. Heller. My name is Dyan, and I'm a clinical fellow of MSK Imaging in St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver. And like most of you, I have spent the last few months talking to thumbnails. This image sounds or looks familiar to most of you, right? The pandemic that began in December 2019 has upended radiologists' lives. The CDC's recommendation for social distancing has effectively knocked out in-person conferences, side-by-side readouts, altered clinical schedules and rotations, postponed certifying examinations, and delayed research activities. Social distancing meant up to a 50% drop in the volume of elective imaging, which also adversely affected case mix diversity. Like my previous colleagues have shown, radiology faculty and trainees have done a tremendous job in adapting, turning to online platforms as novel teaching aids, allowing residents to work from home and for readouts to be conducted virtually. These online platforms have their pros and cons. Overall, they are convenient and accessible, saving precious commuting time and potentially increasing clinical productivity. Because the connections in these platforms are two-way, interactive case-based discussions and readout sessions can be mimicked with both mentor and trainees seeing the images simultaneously. More recent programs allow for active learning through audience participation and even hand-raising function. On the other hand, some of these platforms continue to be plagued by security concerns, and working them out does involve a bit of a learning curve. Furthermore, there is concern for the loss of the personal side-by-side teaching of the trainee at the workstation, a mainstay in the education of future radiologists. Feelings of isolation, reduced camaraderie, and loss of nonverbal feedback, including body language and facial expressions, are also other concerns. This is not the first time that radiology education has been challenged by emerging technologies or highly unusual circumstances. The noon conference teaching method, known as the hot seat conference, is both interactive and stressful. It is the classic, the original, the godfather radiology teaching method that is film and case-based, whose origins are unclear. It is just the way we have always done things. Radiology education was also drastically changed by the invention of the personal computer, paving the way for the digital age. The 1970s gave rise to PACS, increasing workflow and reducing operational costs. Education-wise, it resulted in large collections of teaching files and applications, making electronic learning or filmless education what it is today. The artist formerly known as the overhead projector was superseded by PowerPoint in the 1990s. As the volume of data increased, education transformed from being learner-centered to being instructor-centered, as focus shifted towards the delivery of information rather than the learner's thought process. The 2000s gave birth to a giant baby known as social media. Between the 2011 and 2012 RSNA meetings, the use of Twitter increased by at least 30%, with most educators leveraging this technology to engage attendees and promote collaboration. We have been doing online teaching since March, possibly the longest time that educators have had to do so. In some institutions, even with more relaxed social distancing measures, rounds are still conducted online, and I must admit, I am getting used to talking to thumbnails. Fortunately, recent published data show that these online platforms have not adversely affected trainee education and are generally accepted by residents. However, there is a call from some groups that the traditional side-by-side readout should be progressively and gradually reintroduced along with the easing of social restriction measures. It cannot be denied that radiology education is facing another major transformation due to the pandemic, and nobody knows for certain what the next few months will bring. But whether seated side by side or facing each other screen to screen, radiology education will continue to evolve as it always has. Change is inevitable. In fact, only one thing is constant, and it is a theme that you have seen throughout this entire session. Visionary medicine will always require human insights. Thank you.
Dr. Flores, thank you very much. And thank you to all the presenters for a wonderful job. I hope to see all of you in person, I pray, in Chicago for RSNA 21. Thank you all very much.